Happy Monday, guys. How you doing?
Happy Monday. Welcome back to the US, Joe.
Thank you. Welcome back to New York.
Thank you.
Actually,
Two of
welcome
us
back to New
now.
York for both of you. Yeah. You guys both moved into new places recently, so that's pretty dang cool.
Yeah.
So, congratulations, living the American dream.
Yeah. It was hard to leave San Diego behind, though, as Kevin was saying just a few minutes ago.
Definitely. Where dreams go to die. The sun is so nice. The weather is perfect. It's who wants to go back to work? Who wants to go back to New York after that?
Well, you guys did, so
For some reason, I don't know what we were thinking. It was a moment of weakness, and I got on the plane. I don't know.
Did you step on the plane? And you're like, I might regret actually stepping on this plane.
Certainly regretted it as soon as I got off the plane, and like the sky, rain was just coming down. It was like a swimming pool dumped on your head, basically.
Oh, it still does that.
It does. Yeah.
I was in New York a few weeks ago, and I think the sky was just pouring. It was Tropical Storm Ophelia, I think, was coming through. Just glad we actually got out of there. But and then the next week, y'all had flooding, and then I don't know. You guys moved to a great place. It's super.
Definitely. It's like, why don't we take this island with like natural drainage and just pave over all of it, and then see what happens?
It's an experiment that's been going on for a couple hundred years now. We're still waiting to decide the outcome.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of stuff, we all went to some conferences. You guys went to the DBT Coalesce conference. I was at Gitex Dubai. I think we just want to talk about our experiences there, some things we saw, compare notes about conferences in general and conferences specifically. So yeah, I don't know, should be fun. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, tell us about Gitex, Joe.
Okay, so Gitex it's more of an expo, frankly. I think as far as you could tell, there were over 170,000 attendees at this conference. They claim it's the biggest tech conference in the world. So who's they? Well, the organizers, of course. But I think it's put on by the United Arab Emirates or maybe Dubai or something like that. But they really want to put the UAE as sort of the the center of the technical universe, right? And so I actually found it came on my radar, one, because my friend Ben Taylor, Jepson Taylor's going there quite a bit. He's been there like 10 times and raved about how dynamic it was. And then what was one of the All In podcasts, with Jason Calacanis and Chamath and David Sachs and all those dorks. They were talking about how awesome Dubai and Abu Dhabi were from just a pure business perspective in terms of tech. Like, it seems there's just a lot going on there. And going there, I witnessed it for myself. So it was not really an American conference at all. It was very much Africa, Middle East, Europe, Asia. Weren't a lot of Americans there, right? At least as far as I could tell. But it's hard to tell in something that's the size of a mid-sized metropolitan city in the U.S. So, but there's just like thousands of vendors, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of vendors. So it was overwhelmingly big. But the big theme of the entire conference was AI. That was all anybody was talking about. And so if you can imagine, and it weren't just data vendors either. It was obviously tech vendors. You had Chinese companies selling, various types of wires and cabling and fiber and everything else like that. So everything you could possibly think of was there, right? And AI seemed to be creeping into the conversations with basically anybody you'd be talking to, no matter how far-fetched that might seem. so that was fascinating to see. But it gave, what was it, like, I don't even know how many panels I was on. I gave a talk there, and we can talk more about it in a bit. But yeah, so that's Gitex. So basically in the Middle East, it's Saudi Arabia and the UAE are kind of vying for the spot in terms of like who's going to be the top dog in terms of kind of the future of the Middle East, right? And so I heard that Riyadh, they're supposed to be doing like even a bigger conference there, and then Gitex Morocco, Gitex Africa, I guess it's called. They held in Morocco, but I think they're saying they want 300,000 people there next year.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Because obviously a bigger crowd means it's a better conference. And so,
yeah, I think you beat Coalesce by a few 100,000 people or something like that.
It was big. It was, I would say it's almost too big. I mean, to get from one end of the conference to the other maybe takes you like an hour. So
Wow.
it's just different. I don't know. Anyway,
Wow.
we can talk more about that in a bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
you guys were, I guess, in another sunny area. I'd argue probably a much more fun place.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as hot in San Diego. What was the temperature, Joe? It was like in the 110s or something like that in Dubai.
It's like high, yeah, like 100, I would say.
Okay.
Is what my watch was saying, but yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. What were your impressions, Kevin? I mean, besides the amazing weather that makes us all want to quit our jobs and retire.
Well, yeah, the kind of weather that makes you not ask about the weather. You know what I mean? I don't even know what temperature it was because you don't bother to check it. But my impressions, and we talked about this a little bit before, was, I was coming in off of last year's Coalesce in New Orleans, and a lot of the conversation was around, is this the last hurrah before the fall of Rome?
Oh, it's one of those.
Yeah, it was one of those, being like, like we see the boot and it may be falling, but my impression was that, maybe Rome has fallen, maybe the spotlight has shifted away from data, but it was still great, from my opinion, like really practitioner centric, and the vibe was very high. Everyone that I was talking to was, yes, there's more skepticism, I think rightful consideration about the modern data stack. I know we don't say that anymore, but I'll just say the word.
You owe us $5 now.
Oh yeah, true.
There's a swear jar. Yeah, virtual swear jar.
I'm just joking.
No.
Fine.
Okay, I'll Venmo. But it felt like equal, if not more, exciting since last year's conference. Yeah, Matt, what was your high-level vibe check?
Yeah, very, very much the same. What I would say is that the excitement has shifted just towards what are you actually doing in your job versus here's the latest and greatest thing. I think maybe a few years ago, Coalesce felt kind of like an investor conference almost. Like, yeah, there were lots of practitioners there, but it was all about like, what company am I with and what was the last round they raised and what is their valuation going to be next year? And hey, get on board with the latest, hottest startups that you're going to use in your job because we're all modern now. It's the modern data stack. Whereas now people were just there because they want to get better at their jobs. It's like there's a sense of technical maturity, but also a sense of like really improving on top of the stack that we've adopted. That was kind of my vibe.
So is that the fall of Rome?
This might be the corporatization of Rome or something. Like we're in the post-startup era.
I mean, because it seemed like this is a good thing where people are actually getting value out of the jobs that they're supposed to be doing versus, we're carpet bombing the startup world with a bunch of money so you can start a bunch of tooling companies, right? I would say the latter is where we're going to start seeing the effectiveness of everything that has been building up over the last few years. But I guess it depends whose Rome you're talking about. So.
Are we Byzantine Empire now? Hard to say. It's there was a remarkable lack of, in contrast, I think, to your experience at Gitex, Joe, like AI didn't come up.
Oh, interesting.
In the keynotes.
I was gonna ask. Yeah. But I was trying to catch Tristan's keynote on YouTube this morning at 3 a.m. when I was awake with jet lag, and then I fell asleep. No offense, Tristan. It's not you, it's me. He's actually gonna be on the show in a bit. So, but yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it definitely felt like DBT's trying to tackle the complexity issue, and I think it's rightfully a good theme for them to be addressing. It seems to be one of the common refrains of the modern data stack in general is just the complexity sprawl and so I think any efforts to start working with that is, I think very meritable. So,
yeah, that seems to be a lot of the, if you caught the keynote, Matt, I had like 4 top line announcement takeaways. One was DBT Mesh trying to support like a more decentralized data architecture that could, potentially be summarized as a cross project refs, but those small technical improvements, small, I'm sure is a big effort behind the hood. Like they really do add up to making it feel much better as you go to a large company.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how DBT grew organically, it grew out of a consulting company. It was kind of internal tooling that they use with clients. And initially, it felt like a tool that you used solo, right? Like, I'm an analyst. I'm going to start building these models so I can process data. Now I'm an analytics engineer because actually I'm doing a lot of stuff that ETL developers used to do a few years ago. And so collaboration tools are just part of that maturation process, a recognition that I really shouldn't be solo anymore, that I should be working as part of a team, and that I should be working with other engineers to get things done.
For sure, both downstream and upstream, right? With like, you have the DBT mesh going a little bit downstream to different domains, plus the semantic layer, which is very interesting. We should definitely talk about, but also data contracts, model contracts, I think.
Model contracts, yeah.
Is what they call it, of like before your job run, before the model is built, does like your new model spec meet, like, okay, you have this many columns, these are the names, these are the types, and that's upstream. So it's fascinating to see DBT kind of like push up on both sides against the realities of orgs that are more complex than, the original customer personas.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because Tristan's talk started out about how they get a lot of inspiration from software engineering, which was DBT. I mean, if you kind of look at what DBT was when it started out, it reminded me a lot of basically an ORM, whether you call it Rails or Django or something like that. Like, I mean, when I saw it, I was like, that's literally the same thing you would do if you're doing Jinja templating with a Flask app or templating in any other language, right? And so, I mean, but they took a lot of inspiration from that, and I think that was the big win. Looker did that incidentally too with LookML. When I first saw that, it was like, that's literally a ORM wrapper. Like, it's like, that's all that is. But going forward, right? What's interesting is like when you talk about data contracts in their respect too, because you're not talking about streaming data, you're talking about batch. I mean, that's basically the same as a schema migration check, right? So if you're doing a schema.rb file in Rails, it's like the same thing. You're just like making sure like you're not going to blow your shit up if you if you had these columns in, right? So that's, I mean, but again, inspiration from software engineering, I would say that the practices are tried and true, and it's good to see this finally entering the realm of quote data.
And Joe, do you think we're getting closer to like having better data modeling practices in the modern data stack? What are your thoughts on that? Okay, I'll take that as a no.
After my book comes out, yeah.
Okay.
Until it comes out, we're hopeless.
Yeah.
Won't work.
No,
I mean,
have to wait.
Well, no, I mean, now the self-deprecation aside, I think that at least the discussions there right now, right? I mean, the discussions I'm seeing on, Threads, Twitter, LinkedIn, and conversations we're having with, I mean, I talk to everybody, so it's not like I don't know what's going on. The conversations are there with data modeling down. I think it's, so I sort of think we're going through like the 5 stages of grieving with data modeling, and now we're at the acceptance stage. So it's so I think we can finally get down to business. But for the longest time, it's like, oh, this ain't happening, and then you kind of bargain with it. It's like, well, I'll keep my one big table if I can, just have a few more years on my life. And it's like, well, nah, you're gonna have to go back to data modeling. So it's where we are now. I think as an industry, we're just, it all goes in pendulums, though, right? We took it seriously, then we got hooked on drugs and had bad decisions, and here we are again.
And like grief, like time is the only ingredient, and it never goes away. Not to start a Monday morning chat like that, but
it's a fun Monday morning eulogy. Yeah.
Pouring out for schema unread.
Yeah, but I mean that's what I see. So I think it's coming back. I mean the discussions I see, and again, it might just be my own filter bubbles, but I think my discussions are broad enough where I do see it being discussed in circles that I wouldn't otherwise come across. And so, yeah, what are you guys seeing?
I mean, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, I think ultimately DBT was a tool that was so convenient and easy to use, it led to a lot of bad data practices, right? That's not to disparage the tool. It just made things so accessible. And so now we need to come back and like fix those issues where we're actually mixing in data modeling as an ingredient in the process. And
It's
I
super
think,
easy, but you see this in
Yeah.
software engineering. I mean,
You totally do.
the notion of relational modeling
Yep.
that's been around since 1970 when, Vietnam War was going on, and he had really good music back then, and that was forgotten about. I mean, an ORM, for example, I mean, you can throw whatever the hell you want into that thing, right? And that's what happens. So I would say it's almost worse in software engineering actually, because well, for one, again, you can when you create an app, like I just want a new field, I'm going to make that a column in my table, then you can sort there. But the downstream effects of this, right? This is where it starts manifesting in sort of this duct tape fashion we've been working in this industry, because guess whose data you typically rely on? The app, right? And so like you keep saying, it can only get worse from there. It can never get better. So that's just the reality of it. But yeah, and and the other part of it is just a knowledge gap, right? Where I don't feel like a lot of the old school things that worked in data modeling, we're talking about Kimball, for example, and whatever else. It's like that wasn't a thing, and so people just conveniently ignored it. And but it's coming back. People are recognizing that there's merit to this stuff. And even the other day, I saw who was Rob Harmon. He's a OG data warehouse guy, and he was talking about relational modeling and with respect to analytics. And I was like, that's absolutely right. You should probably think about that, because it helps dedupe your data and remove the dependencies, and that's just a good thought exercise to do, right? So I don't know. Maybe we just don't do anything.
What are your thoughts, Kevin? What was
Kevin,
your impression in that regard?
Kevin's a smart one in the group.
Yeah, exactly. Let's hear from him.
I'm not writing the book. I'm just reading the book. And pre-ordering and what you're saying about like transactional databases and having wrangled a lot of like Alembic migrations in the Django days. One of the hard parts is that it's so difficult to change the schema in your transactional database, right? Like a full-on migration famously takes years in some cases. And I've started to think of the data model as this equilibrium between two different competing forces, where on one hand you have like, how quickly can you change the data model, but also how thoughtfully was it designed up front, right? Founders are notoriously bad at this, so sorry for anyone out there, but
Kevin's actually projecting right now.
This is speaking of grief. Not
We're
you
all
have like
projecting.
the upfront design, but on the opposite side of it, you have like, what are the actual needs of the business? What is the pricing model? What is like afforded by the tools that you have? And I feel like we should subtract away the pricing and the tooling like pressures, because those are kind of artificial, right? All that matters is the needs of the business, and can you build around that?
Were these some of the discussion points then at Coalesce? Like, 'cause you talk about things going back to kind of more practitioner discussions. What were some of the practitioner discussions that you were hearing? Was this a part of that, or were there others that stood out to you?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think
Were you all just eating tacos from a taco truck the entire time?
Pretty
which is
much.
what I would
we,
be doing.
Yeah, we didn't actually go to any talks or anything like that. No, in a couple of different discussions I had, I think there's definitely a focus on, and this is something we've talked about a lot, Joe, more generally, but just the development of best practices. And so, Hadoop, we kind of tried to reboot the entire data ecosystem and pretend that nothing from the past existed. That led into the modern data stack and like all these tools that are cloud accessible that really run on similar principles that are way easier to use at the same time. And now it's like, we need to actually readopt the stuff that we forgot about when Hadoop came out. Like that turns out to be really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of the talks that I went to, like, Nicole and Adam at Bluecore talking about, using DBT and BigQuery to scale up like separate bills per customer, because I have tons of different customers. And ClickUp2 had a great talk about using Hex as a sort of command and control center for their data. So actually, like, being able to have a kill switch for long running queries within Hex that
Interesting.
When we zoom out a little bit, and same thing with Ramp and Materialize. Like Ramp has this cool use case where they have risk, like detection, fraud detection, that they prototyped in Snowflake. And as a credit card company, you can imagine why this is important, but they shifted it over to a real-time use case. If we really zoom out, it's like Blue Core talking about scaling up one build per customer, a command and control center, having a real-time use case. It's like, at least for these three talks, how did they patch up the gaps and the limitations of like their more foundational tools, Snowflake, BigQuery, DBT, with other tools and other processes?
I think as we like grow into this mature era of the modern data stack, or whatever we choose to call it, which will probably be something different, it is again about like how we're actually using the tools. It's not about Snowflake or DBT is going to solve all your problems. It's like, how do I actually build my customers correctly? How do I manage long running queries? How do I manage out of control costs? So hopefully this is
topics. Yeah,
they are all very important topics. Yeah, and it's very refreshing to get to this point, honestly.
Yeah, and notably not about AI.
Not about AI. Yeah, it's funny that I think that's true. I mean, did we hear anything about AI at this conference? Is Metaplane going to come out with a new AI tool next week?
I mean, I did see. Sorry if this spoils anything for the DBT team, but a friend showed me a photo that they took. Like someone from DBT was presenting, and there's a little widget on the bottom right-hand side that said "Ask AI." I don't know what that is. They didn't explain it, but we'll see.
We'll see. Interesting. Yeah, at Gitex, AI was all anyone was talking about. Like it was. So I spoke on the main stage, and then that was about, what were some of these talks? So they basically, like, as a speaker, they just give you a bunch of topics to talk about, and they basically just stuff you into like as many talks as you could possibly do. I actually had to tell them like I'm not that kind of guy, I have standards. So don't put me out like that. So, but it was still like a lot of panels and a lot of talks and fireside chats and stuff. And thankfully Ben Taylor was on two of my fireside chats, or I guess Jepson Taylor now. Sorry, Ben. But he and I are like, we're super good friends. And so those are pretty good. But even then, like, how I am. I mean, I can be a bit curmudgeon-y with this kind of stuff. I mean, I come from an ML background, and I've always been very. I've seen these hype cycles before. This one seems eerily reminiscent of the others, where there's, a ton of promise, and then I think it really comes down to delivery and execution, and that's where I was just arguing, like, if we're not building the right foundations to make this succeed, I know what's going to happen. I've seen this play out before. But you contrast this though, right, with all the other talks out there, right, in the panels, and it's like, AI it's just going to change everything, and you can just magically plug this into your company and it'll just work. And I was like, I don't know what companies you're plugging this into, but the ones I know of, the ones I live in reality, right? That's the world I live in, and the last day I was just on this panel, and I got a bit snipey with the panelists, because they're like, singularity is coming, and it'll, artificial general intelligence will be here in 2030. And I'm like, okay. And how I can be, especially mad. It's just
I definitely do.
you know me when I get that look on my face and I'm just staring off into space where I'm about to say something that I might regret later.
Yeah.
That happened. And so and then so I just had to kind of I don't know, just lay it out there like this. This is all great. Most corporate data sets are absolute hellscapes. So unless AI can like figure out how to solve that problem, I think we're and you can barely do BI on top of this stuff, let alone, large language models and generative AI. I'm like, I don't know what world you live in where you think this is going to be a great idea and it just magically works. The world I live in is where you're going to have to get a lot of things right for this to work. And so that was the theme of a lot of talks. In fact, though, it was funny because a journalist actually wrote about my rants in an article. And they're like, I thought that was pretty cool. They did a really fair job of it, but I didn't see anyone else getting written about, for instance. So, but it was, I think I just had to take that, I guess in that case, a very contrarian, but I think realistic perspective with AI, because I just saw so much hand waving and highfalutin, just, I wouldn't say the word nonsense, but I will say it. It just seemed very, it seemed like people had a motive for saying this stuff, like they wanted to sell something to you, for example. But it's what's also interesting is in the Middle East now, you're seeing these, the governments are they have whole AI ministries now, right? So it's something they're taking seriously. They want to evolve their economies, probably away from petrol and stuff, and they're looking at technology and AI as initiatives to to pursue, and more power to them. I think that's an awesome thing. My whole thing is I'm probably the most bullish person you'll meet in terms of, I think, the long-term impacts of AI. I'm just also probably the most short-term realistic person you'll meet as well, because I know how hard this stuff can be, right? So it's not mutually exclusive. But it is interesting to see, again, every vendor, whether it was, there's a lot of drone vendors there, for example, like just crazy stuff. And that's actually like the cool stuff, right? Like that's where ML actually works, is all computer vision and sensors and stuff. Those are the use cases I'm bullish on, where it's like anything with unstructured data, like that's dope. Go for it all day. So it was interesting. Robots, a lot of robots there walking around.
Yeah, without digging in, I don't want to go too much into any conflict that's happening in the world right now. There are actually several. And the terrifying thing is to see how drones are used in the field and how this technology is like impacting all kinds of things in terrifying ways. And I'm kind of afraid of AI in that respect as well. I'm not expecting the singularity. I'm not expecting it to take over, but I'm just terrified.
I don't think you need it.
How hackers and other groups are going to use this stuff against us.
Yeah, I completely agree with your sentiments there. It's, I mean, we do a good enough job without it. So, but yeah, that's the reality of it. And so it's interesting because there's almost a tale of two worlds we're discussing here. Well, one is like, the data community in the States, and data proper, I would say kind of the more modern data stack. I owe you guys $5 now, but it was couple that with the rest of the world, right? Where there's just, what I perceive is there's just so much money, in the in the Middle East, for example, at these types of conferences, where you're going to have some sort of an angle, right? If you go out there and you don't have an AI story, it's kind of like, you're like a weird kid alone at the lunch table at high school, and that's not cool either. So I get it. The optics are, you have to have an AI story. I'm not stupid. So, well, I am, but in other ways.
Well, we're settled up on the $5. I think Matt's gonna leave this with $10, and
I'll buy you a drink or something. I don't know, or you can buy me a drink. Wherever we are now, I think we both said it a few times.
I mean, yeah, $10 in New York might not go very far, but
no.
This isn't a great analogy, but it's making me think of when watching Oppenheimer. Like, there was just so much excitement in the Manhattan Project, but at some point, someone comes in and is like, we have like a single gram of uranium, and it's also not purified. So what exactly are we doing here right now? We're the only, like, what was the general, let's just say, like, job title at the conference? Like, how many data people were there? Yeah.
We're at Coalesce. Gitex, I don't even know, because again, it's a mix of like a lot of tech companies, like pure tech companies, not data. Right. And then you had, your big vendors like Snowflake, AWS, Databricks were all there. I think Databricks was there. Snowflake was definitely there. And then some ancillary ones like Vast was there and stuff. And so, but it's hard to tell what the titles were. I think it was a lot of salespeople, to be frank. Right. And so I don't know who the buy side of that equation was, but there was definitely a lot of, you can spot salespeople a mile away. They all wear the same suit. Right.
Yeah.
So as far as I could tell, it was enterprise salespeople, but it was interesting too. I think like a lot of chief data officers, so I was at did some roundtables, like Zhamak Degani and I did a roundtable, kind of an evening of the conference with a bunch of chief data officers from like Africa, Middle East, and that kind of thing. And that was interesting, just hearing the, kind of getting an idea of the challenges they're facing. And lo and behold, the challenges everyone faces, no matter where you are in the world. It's like getting buy-in from the business on stuff. winning with data, getting more value from your data, and all that stuff. I mean, these are the same, arguments, and criticisms, or I would say problems I hear anywhere I go in the world, and I've been everywhere in the world and talked to probably most people, and it's like these are the themes. Nothing changes, and so that's I spend a lot of my time talking to chief data officers of very big companies, right, and CTOs of some of the biggest companies on the planet, right? I mean, that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, and again, same problems, but different opportunities, though, right? I would say, like, one of the people I talked to, CTO for one of the largest oil companies in the world, and this person was doing a lot of interesting stuff with automations and sensors and stuff, right? And and electric vehicles and charging stations and all this other stuff. So it was very interesting to get that perspective of how that tech and data is being used in the wild, and to solve because the oil industry is evolving, right? It's not like we got a lot of it left. So these companies ain't stupid. They're moving more towards other sources of revenue. But it's interesting to see how tech plays a role in that, right? So, but that's the makeup of the people, at least but again, 170,000 people plus whoever else is there. It's like it's going to be hard to meet everybody. So.
Let me ask you this. I mean, there was a lot of hype. Were there any announcements that were kind of stand out where they were about AI or some next generation technology, but they actually seemed very concrete and very potentially impactful?
It was hard to say, right? Like I don't know. I don't think I'm smart enough to figure that out unless I dive into it, right? Because everyone can talk a big game, and I just learned, like, it's always the details, and I don't think I'm smart enough to know that, or I don't have the access to understand what's actually working. So yeah, I don't know, but
it really is like the tale of two worlds. I imagine that there's some companies where the CDO and CTO went to Gitex, and then, like, head of analytics engineering went to Coalesce.
very likely. Yeah. I mean, how many people are at Coalesce this year?
I heard it was 1,900 or so. I don't know
Okay.
for sure. I don't know what the official figure is.
Interesting.
Right. And there was a police chief conference happening right beforehand. And it was interesting to see, people walking around with Oracle on their lanyards. So
yeah, I noticed that too. I'm like,
wait,
what is this conference even? And it turned out to be a police chief conference, and Oracle was there.
Huh. All right.
I don't know exactly what International Association of Chiefs of Police. Yeah, it was happening at exactly the same time. Maybe it started like a day before, but yeah, let's just say different. That's the third world that we're talking about. Yeah, very different worlds.
Interesting. I know one of them. I know one chief of police here. Maybe I'll go ask him if you want. So that's interesting. Let's take some audience questions here. I can't, somehow StreamYard's not letting me show these on the screen, so I'll just read them out. But let me see here. Sorry. Matthew Brandt asks, what is your least favorite part of these in-person conferences?
I guess it is the hype sometimes, right? There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. There are very concrete product announcements. There are new companies every time, and a lot of that stuff is very interesting. But you definitely have a hype overlay where you're just like, yeah, that's nonsense. Those claims are nonsense.
Give me a generic example, Matt.
I would more. Let's see. So a lot of the AI claims, right? Like, I'm very skeptical of. I think people will figure out how to use AI and analytics in a way that actually makes sense, but we're still seeing claims like large language models are going to replace all your analysts and such. If you walk around and talk to enough people on the trade floor amongst vendors, you'll hear those kinds of claims. And yeah, I find that a bit irritating.
Yeah. What are your least favorite parts about in-person conferences, Kevin?
This is going to sound like a really cheesy answer. It's like when you ask for someone's weaknesses in hiring, they're like, I work too hard. But but like the big struggle really was like deciding what to do and working with the FOMO. Like, Tuesday night, there's, 6, maybe 6+ independent events going on. All of them sound fun, and you know that you're going to have a great time at each. Same thing is true for all of the talks, like the parallel talk tracks.
Yeah.
Not great. Would love to go to as many as possible.
Which events or which parties did you end up going to?
Well, we threw one on
fun
Monday
ones.
night. Yeah, the fun one. We had one on Monday, which was a lot of fun, I think. Spent a lot of time meeting new folks. Shout out to Jared, who works at the Indiana Pacers, and sat down for like an hour just learning about what it's like to work on data at a franchise like that. That's the kind of conversation I love from these conferences, is just like going down to the nitty gritty and really learning about someone else's like world. I think is a fun part of working in data, is that yes, you can talk about the technical specifics, but when you go up one level, it's like you can learn about a whole different industry.
I think that's, I mean, the question was our least favorite part, but I think that's one of my favorite parts about conferences, is just talking to people that I normally wouldn't get to talk to and getting to know, kind of what their world's like. Because I always find that interesting, right? It's because, we all operate in our own universes or multiverse, whatever it is. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them out there. And there's a lot of practitioners. There's always interesting stuff happening, right? And so I think that if you can't get your pulse in that kind of stuff, I mean, it doesn't do you any favors. I think that's the perfect opportunity, because unlike virtual conferences, really, right, where it's hard to interact with people, I think, especially the kind of the after conference events, like that's really, I think, what makes it fun. Like I typically anymore, I show up to conferences without getting a pass. I'm going to do that reInvent next month. I'm going to go to, Gable, Chad Sanderson's company. They're having a, kind of a launch party. I'm going to show up just for that, right? Because Chad's a friend, and I want to go support everybody, and it's good to have like 20 beers with people that night. So, but why not, right? So, but that's what makes it fun. I mean, we had that, in Vegas, Kevin, in June at the Snowflake Summit. I mean, that I just showed up that night for the giant rooftop happy hour that we were all doing, and that was a blast. I mean, it was like the who's who of the data world was there. Like everybody was there, except the ones that were Databricks. But
yeah, the like you and Chris coming in the last minute at VIPs. It's so nice to reconnect with people, and I think Coalesce does a really good job of that. Honestly, is like I know that Matt and I were like two electrons where you go everywhere except for right next to each other, but it's just a lot of friendly faces, and met new people too that you only see in a box.
Yeah, like us right now.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with Coalesce in particular, that really was the refreshing thing. And it was really nice to see people who actually work in data. Because, Joe, your description maybe 2 years ago or even 1.5 years ago of reInvent was that it was just a bunch of vendors talking to each other. And that's no one's favorite type of conference.
But that was right after COVID, too.
Right after COVID.
reInvent, like this was literally like everyone went back, and it was, I walked into the hall and I was like, this is so sad. This is so sad. There's no customers here. All the vendors are just like talking to each other, and that's about it. I'm like, it was, if that would have, but I think that's changing though, obviously, right? I mean, Snowflake Summit customers are coming back, and reInvent this year, I expect there'll be a lot of customers, and that kind of stuff. And there better be, I don't know, I don't really care. Actually, I'm not showing up for the event. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But you said that Coalesce was more like a community event this year, right? It didn't really feel like it was,
felt that way.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, there were lots of great vendors there, but their focus was more on how can I help you to actually accomplish what you're trying to do, which should always be the sales focus. But I feel like over the last couple years, post Snowflake IPO, data hype era, it was all about how they're the greatest thing ever and they're going to change the world, right? And we've shifted beyond that, and just talking to people about trying to develop their careers who've now been in it for a couple of years, and they're like, okay, where do I go next? How do I get better at this job? How do we solve problems with data in our company? How do we get better at sharing data with our customers and with our partners? That was just a lot of fun. And I feel like even the vibe at Snowflake Summit at Databricks Data Plus AI Summit
Yeah.
was a bit less of that practitioner vibe. And just even in the last couple of months, as people traveled more and more for conferences, there is a sense of people just trying to build their careers and get work done.
That's interesting. I noticed this at Data Eng Bytes, for example, and actually DEWCon. That was the other conference I went to. I didn't even talk about that one. Okay, so shout out to Ananth Palkoderi and Ashwin Chrissy James. They put up a phenomenal conference in Bangalore, right? So I keynoted that one as well. And that was cool because it was all practitioners, right? Some vendors, but the vendors was like, Vinod, the guy who created Hootie, right? So it's not like he doesn't know tech. So it was a great event, and it was super cool to see. I mean, it was a few hundred data engineers in Bangalore. So Bangalore, for everyone out there, it's like that's the Silicon Valley. I would say it's basically the supply chain capital of software. If you want software written and you want it done cost effectively, you're going to go to Bangalore. End of story. Not joke to me that basically there's an old saying that you could throw a rock and you're either going to hit a software engineer or the sidewalk. There's so much activity there. I mean, it's an unimaginably huge city. I think it's like 25 million people or something like that. So it's like big. But the tech scene there and the data engineering scene there was awesome. Like they liked, they're asking where Matt was, and it's like, well, he's somewhere else. Sorry. But people like our book there, which is pretty cool. But it was just really cool to see. And again, back to the common theme of the same types of questions people ask, right? These people are working at, mostly US based companies, European companies, and like have an outpost in Bangalore. I would say an outpost, like amazing. Most of their staff's there. But same types of challenges, right? My data model sucks. What can I do? One person asked me this, and I was like, I don't know. You probably dug yourself into such a hole. You're gonna have to probably start over. It's just, he had in this case, one big table and other big tables on top of this one big table. And it's just like, this isn't gonna work. But again, these are the same questions you would get anywhere in the world, right? Like how does my data team, succeed at my company and all this kind of stuff. It was no different. So, but I like these community-based events precisely because you can get interactions with, practitioners, right? And I think that's my favorite stuff. Like, I don't really care about talking to, I don't really care about getting vendor spiels, I would say. I mean, Kevin's a vendor, but he's also a really good friend, right? And so, but that's just it. And the Data Eng Bytes in Australia was the same way. It's a community event. And again, I like those conversations. You just get to talk to people and really understand what's going on, in a way that it would be impossible to do otherwise, right? So that's what's rewarding. And again, as you point out, the common theme that I'm seeing around the world is like, how can I do better at my job, right? Like how can I continue adding more value? And those are the two big questions. And these are the two sides of the same coin. So
it's funny to think of what is truly cross-cultural, because like our world is big, right? Like even in the US, we're not talking about the whole joke of the world being held up on the back of like someone with a gray beard writing COBOL. It's like they're using an Oracle database, right? They're probably not using Snowflake yet, but it's like even in the US,
they're police chiefs actually.
That's true though, and it is like, yeah, what's universal? I guess in-law relationship tension and stakeholder management, or I guess both of those are stakeholder management, depending on how you view it. But I haven't traveled for a fraction of the amount of conferences you've seen. I think Coalesce did do a good job of managing the ratio of vendors and practitioners. It's kind of like when you're throwing a housewarming party. It's like you can't invite that many friends from work. And the ones that you do invite have to pass the vibe check, because otherwise you have 20 people in a corner just talking about work.
Yeah, that sucks.
And then it's not fun. But you do want, perhaps it would be better without any work friends, but I feel like the best parties pull in a whole bunch of people from different parts of life. But it's tough. It has to be contained. Saying as a vendor too is
yeah, but you get more street cred precisely because you're not vendoring, right? Like I think that's why we like you a lot, is because you're not out there putting a link to Metaplaner in every single LinkedIn comment, for example, right? That'd be cheese, but not trying to pitch people on it. And I mean, I think you actually get more credibility the less you say in a lot of ways, right? Because it's just what you do that matters, not like how much you can, like rant about your company and stuff. So
Yeah, I really don't get it, especially because a lot of vendors, I mean, it's like a whole karmic cycle, right?
yeah,
Like if you are working at a startup, you get tons of inbound from like recruiters, uh, for example, or like marketing agencies. And then, startups always complain to each other, oh, we get too much inbound from recruiters. It's like, what do you think you're doing? Right?
right.
Like, why are you like, let's break the chain. Come on, folks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just be real.
Well, I got to say too, like DBT, I think they do a really good job at balancing community. So, I mean, we have the Joe Reese and DBT Roadshow, for example, right? So, like, we've done this in several cities, and I think we'll continue doing it. But it was they've always done a really good job at balancing. I would say putting the community first. It's supposed to be obviously an event where to drive interest in the cloud, DBT cloud, but at the same time, they do it in a very tasteful way, right? Like I'm not supposed to shill. I don't shill anyway, but it's one of those things, right? We can promote a good discussion. I think in tasteful ways bring up, their offerings, but I think they do a really good job at making sure that it's not corny. Like, because I don't do that crap. Like, if it was me, like going out there and basically doing a monologue, right? Like that's not going to help my brand at all either. Like that's exactly the opposite of what I'm about. So, but I work with them precisely because they're very mindful about the community aspect, and that's what I like. And I'll work with a lot of people for that reason, because I think a lot of people want to be overtly shilling and stuff, and it's just not what I do. You can find other people that do it, but like that's it's not that kind of guy. But I think they did a really good job. So what you're saying with the conferences, I think definitely rings true. So it's dope.
You know that DBT did a good job. One last thing of like,
yeah.
I always try and measure a conference or really any event as like, how do you feel coming out of it?
Yeah.
Right. Like, do you feel like you're a bag of money and people wanted some of what was in that bag? Or do you feel like more energized, more connected with your work and the people that you work with? And coming out of Coalesce, I would love to hear how you feel, Matt. Like I feel fired up.
It's dope.
Honestly, of like, I'm very lucky to work in an industry with you two and a whole bunch of interesting, very kind, like smart, well-intentioned folks. And you can't say that for every industry.
Yeah, I mean, conferences are exhausting, and I definitely felt pretty exhausted after Coalesce, but really happy to be a part of that community, and also made me want to come back next year and go to other conferences with a similar kind of experience where you're just really connecting with people and talking together about solving problems. And where, even though there's the sense that, maybe every startup is kind of competing with every other startup for rounds of funding and other things, everyone's working together at the same time. There's a sense of collaboration in spite of the fact that everyone needs to get out there and make a living.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than ever, actually, all the vendors need each other, because the ecosystem, you just can't have one vendor in a category. That's not how categories work, right? You build a category by having social proof of other companies in a category, and so you think everyone more than ever needs each other, right? But it's sort of like Hunger Games versus Woodstock, or Rainbow Gathering or something. But it's We'll see. Actually, Mike Nash has a good question. Do you find that conferences help creative thoughts and ideas too, like workflows, products, businesses, etc.?
You're skeptical.
For me, I feel like it's a you get what you give sort of situation where I feel like, generalizing a bit, that there's a lot more sharing in the software community than there is in the data community, which, to be fair, a lot of the work can be open sourced and a lot of our work is highly proprietary, right? But that I've been in a lot of conversations the past week where we just get real, like I work at a startup, you work at a, similar company, and we can just get down to brass tacks And like once you can get down to that brass tack level, I think you can learn a lot on what other people are doing. But if you just stay at the surface, then I think it's like much more difficult to really learn what other people are doing if you're not willing to share yourself.
Yeah. Let me ask this. Is there a way for us to get closer to the best aspects of the more open source software universe? Or is that just not going to happen?
What does that look like to you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think part of it, one thing I've said before about open source is that when you start to view open source as a component, you're probably going to be more successful in your business than if you just view open source as your business. Here's this one piece of open source and I'm going to sell it to people. That just doesn't seem to work very well anymore. But if you have a component and then you have other pieces that are proprietary, because that's what businesses need to do, I think that complementarity can work really well.
I tend to agree with this, right? I think you well, just from a pure business standpoint, your moat sort of disappears if you're just a pure open source play, right? Like what competitive advantage do you have when you just gave away your like the golden goose, so to speak, right? So I think you should definitely hold a few things close if you wanted to make a business out of it. If you want to make, I would say it depends on what you want, though, right? Like you had Max Howell on the show a bit ago, right? And he's working on XYZ, and he's a guy who created Homebrew, right? So I think he's a good example of somebody who wrote the most popular open source package, arguably ever, and made absolutely $0 off of this, right? That's why he's doing T.XYZ, so open source can creators can get remunerated for their efforts. And so, but to form a company around that, I would say, especially in this day and age with just the turbulence, I don't know, go for it if you want to, but I think it's just a trickier play, just because I think we've seen what happens. It plays out, and the problem is, it's a classic. You are in some ways competing with yourself if if your open source is that good, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges that quite a few open source vendors face. So you have to double down on what's a competitive advantage that people are going to pay money for. Like Spark is a really good example, I think, of where they got it right? So Databricks, formed as a way of packaging Spark and selling that to the masses. But like, if you ever tried rolling your own Spark back in the day, that sucked. So
definitely not fun. And I think a big unspoken theme at Coalesce was DBT's feature announcements around cloud.
Yeah.
For example, column level lineage, DBT Explorer, being able to deploy to cloud from the CLI, where they're in that tough situation you mentioned, where they're competing against themselves. And
their core is awesome.
It's awesome. Exactly. Like what got them here. And DBT deserves a lot of credit for building a lot of the trend of software best practices to data. But this is an old thing that we've been talking about, but now they're competing against what got them to this point. I think that they were going in the right direction in terms of making cloud super compelling, though.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the podcast I did with Tristan too, I mean, it's not like he's unaware of the complexity of DBT. I mean, he mentioned 38,000 models at one company, and there's probably companies with bigger model sprawl, but it's like they're well aware of this fact, and that's not a healthy hygienic practice that you want to continue with your customer base. So I mean, I think it's. So I mean, I was glad when he mentioned it, and then it's, I mean, I think they're making the moves they need to make. It's just. But you got to couple this too with the economy and where it is, and with data teams, again, as you're saying, everyone needs to kind of double down. I mean, everyone, I think, is focused on what they need to do for their jobs, because there's a bit of concern of whether you're not going to have one. So
yeah, and you need, I mean, those data teams exist for a reason, because they provide value for companies. But if at some point you're not providing that value, or I don't know, not increasing your value, you're going to be a target for cuts as they come along. And so, yeah, it's a tough time, unfortunately, but it's an opportunity for people to really shine in their jobs too, if they kind of go beyond what the expectations are.
Yep.
Which is reflected in, I think, this is maybe in one of the LinkedIn comments. I definitely noticed it on the floor, is the focus on cost management. Right. And we see this on LinkedIn, but to see it like manifested in real life.
Yep.
definitely downstream of focusing on ROI. Well, if the R is hard and what everyone is striving for, we also have to focus on the I, which happens to be much more concrete and a bit more manageable. So this, I think, is a new thread from last year. Whereas I haven't seen that much new, honestly, at this conference. Like you go around the expo hall, it's the same vendors, right? The ones who kind of survived the existential Darwinian call from last year, but it's the same folks, right? DBT had the fun thought of putting us all across from our competitors. So that was a nice little shakeup. Yeah. You could see people going from one booth to another, and they would always go to both.
Were there any like observability brawls or anything like that? Because like I might be willing to pay for that actually.
Yeah, I would too. That and the Elon and Zuckerberg fight, I would pay to watch either one. I'll participate in one of them, so it'd be fine.
Joe's gonna take us out. Joe is Who do we put up against Joe? I'm not sure.
Well, we'll take bets on that one. But that's really interesting. But I think that I think it's actually a good thing that they put you all kind of across from each other. It's. I think it's part of the community thing, right? It's like you all need to learn to get along too, and
for sure.
I think there's some merit to an approach like that. So Mike Rogoff said observability probably equals a lot of staring at. He's a very literal person, it looks like.
Yeah, a lot of staring at each other and trying to call anomalies. Yeah, exactly. Well, it makes for what ultimately matters is like a better experience for someone who came to Coalesce for the first time, go through the conference hall, you don't want to spend all of your time there, right? We had great swag on the whole. That definitely leveled up, but you should be going to talks.
Closing out. What was the swag like this year? Because I at the beginning of the year I thought we'd be entering the swag apocalypse with the cuts. Is swag any good?
I think vendors are figuring out that you want to do things like offer headshots, for example, which Absolver was doing, or offer really good coffee, espresso, or other coffee drinks. Because when you go to a conference, that's the stuff you remember actually. Like, oh, I got this really cool headshot, or oh, the food was really good at that conference, which by the way, it was the whole conference. Or I needed some coffee and I found it at this one vendor and I had a conversation with them. Cool. For the most part, we don't want throwaway t-shirts and such. I think
it's like stress balls and stuff. Yeah. I mean, the amount of like environmental waste I imagine at conferences is crazy. Like, I don't know. I would say it for all you vendors out there, like, please be mindful of the swag you're producing. Like most of the shit gets thrown away. That's the bottom line. And it's like, it pollutes. It's disgusting. We don't need more yo-yos or any of that crap, or pens, right? I mean, I think you're talking about experiences. I noticed at Gitex, like they had like some booths are like, gourmet food with espresso, and I'm like, I'll stop there because the vendor hall is like, you're gonna be waiting an hour to get a pizza there, so it's not fun. But yeah, I think the swag's that's an interesting, because I always kind of use it as an anecdotal barometer of where things are. If the swag's over the top, then things are good. But if you're focusing now on experiences, and Ramona says except for socks, right? I actually do like conference socks. That they're kind of what I wear a lot. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm glad people are back though. Just focusing on the experiences of the booth. I had I remember one time at Big Data London, I went to the wrong booth. I thought it was a different one, and I ended up getting like stuck there for 10 minutes while this guy's trying to demo, and it was a bad demo. He's just clicking around, showing me the whole menu, and I'm like, so finally, I thankfully saw a friend and was like, "Hey, like, I gotta go now." But so also vendors don't do that. It's not a timeshare meeting, so
it's with the demo and with swag. I mean, and with being vendory with outreach and stuff. It's like, can we at least hit the bar that we like? Can you make some swag if you're gonna go down like this environmental waste route? Make some swag that you'd want to wear outside of a gym, right?
Yeah.
Okay, who doesn't need gym shirts? But you probably don't need 100 of them.
I have 100 of them.
I would have bet that you had at least like a couple hundred.
My wife kills me. I get new shirts all the time from people, and she's like, "What? Can you just tell people to stop?" And I'm like, "I like shirts."
You can't say no to a good shirt.
No, check out Estuary, by the way. But yeah, man, yeah. We'll see what the next year's conferences are like. I'm very curious what reInvent's going to be like and the whole vibe there, right? So I think that's going to be an interesting barometer. And then, of course, next year, early next year, we have Data Day Texas, right? And that's going to be a fun one. So you should show up to that one, Kevin. That one's a good one.
You should. It's
on a
very
Saturday.
small. Yeah, it's there's a lot of camaraderie there. It's
a fun one.
Exceptional. Yeah.
Well, cool. I know we're at time. I know everyone's probably got meetings to get to. And yeah, thanks to the audience here. It's fun seeing everyone back here. We know we took last week off. Anything you guys want to talk about or announce? What's coming up next few weeks or months or whatever? Nothing, Kevin? All right. Well,
not at the moment. I'm just happy to not be traveling for a while. How about you, Joe?
Well, next week I'll be in Toronto, giving a talk at the DEMA conference in Toronto on Friday. And then the next week I'll be in Helsinki, giving a talk there at the Agile Data Summit. So that's going to be really, really fun. After that, I'll be in San Francisco on the 16th of November, speaking at a meetup with Coactive.ai, really cool guys. And then after that, I'll be at reInvent. And then we'll see what December holds. I may or may not have a lot going on, but we'll find out. And then January, Data Day Texas. And I think we got a bunch of other stuff, Matt. So yeah, anyway, stay tuned.
Yeah, one announcement.
Yeah. Go for it, dude.
It's not for me or Metaplane, but my good friend, Dr. Joy Bulamwini, founder of the Algorithmic Justice League and a Netflix documentary, just is launching her book on unmasking AI. And she's coming to New York next week. I think you can pre-order it right now. It might actually already be released. But Joy does such amazing work on algorithmic bias and relevant to our conversation earlier. Like, yes, data can be used in many harmful ways, but it can also be harmful even when we have good intentions. So I would definitely check out her work. I'm eagerly awaiting to read it.
Cool.
So a little plug-in for our friend.
Yeah, shoot me a link. That sounds awesome. I'll go check that out and read it. Maybe have her on the show. That'd be fun.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, be even better. So a friend of Kevin's is a friend of ours, except Mike Rogoff. I'm just kidding.
When is Mike coming on again?
Yeah, he needs to get on the show.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks to everybody. Good to see you again, Kevin. I always feel like it's just you're born of the inner circle. So it's always fun to chat with you. Yeah. Anyway, we'll be back next week with who's on next week here. Yoav Cohen's on the show. He's from Satori. So I'm not sure if he's going to be calling in from Israel, but we'll find out soon. I need to figure out the logistics of that, given everything that's going on. So should be fun. But yeah, after that, who's on next week? After that, we got Nadine Farah from One House. It's gonna be dope. So yeah, good stack of people showing up here. The Joe Reese show, we have Matt Sharp and Chris Brosso. Their interviews is gonna be dropping this week, and yeah, otherwise I'm gonna be heads down working on some courses. So anyway, I know we're over time, so we better get going. But anyway, good to see everybody. Take care.
Bye bye.